Welcome, everybody, to episode 3 of Lessons from Terrible Students. We are the Terrible Students. My name is Jeremy. That's Dr. Tara. Say hey, Dr. Tara.
Hey, Dr. Tara.
Today, we're going to be talking about SMEs, subject matter experts, and how we lived our lives as SMEs before our learning careers kicked in, and kind of how we have to know how our SMEs work before we can effectively develop training for them. Before we get into all of that, I did want to say that this podcast is sponsored by Lumius. At Lumius, we are your partner in learning. So without further ado, let's get into it. What we wanted to do today, we are going to go through a couple of different, or I guess I should say, a couple of different SME experiences. Our experiences were very different as far as the work we were doing, but they do have a lot of similarities. So I think this will be a very interesting discussion. What I wanted to start with was kind of my experience, and then we'll give Tara a moment to kind of describe her experience. And then what I want to do is something I call Tales from the Field. So anybody that has worked in the field or has worked in frontline, even retail environments, we all have stories that we like to tell pretty much anytime we get the opportunity to. So I didn't know which one I wanted to share. So what I'm going to do, and we'll see how it works for us, is I'm going to have Tara asking probing questions, as all of our instructional designers know what those are. And she's going to pull some of these out of me as a frontline service technician for an ISP, internet, phone, digital cable provider. So let's jump into it. First, I'm going to start off, and I'm just going to go right into kind of what my day-to-day was as a field technician. And then, Tara, you'll just have to listen, and then I'll let you go. How's that sound?
That's fine.
Awesome. So
I'm used to that, Jeremy. So please.
Not with me, you are. Now, don't start that. Put me on the back. That's funny. I was a service and installation technician for 7 years, from the years of 2007 to 2014 for a local ISP. Now, we provided, I guess I should say, a worldwide ISP. It was a relatively large company. We provided digital cable, internet, phone, and eventually home security to customers around us. So when I got started, I had a 6-week onboarding training class that kind of taught me the basics of digital cable. And then I went back out into the field for a little bit, came back, did an internet class, back out into the field again, came back, did a phone class. And that's kind of how we did our training. But then after that, after they got kind of all that basic onboarding, after that first 6 weeks or so, you're thrown to the wolves, for lack of a better term. You're on it. You're going to get assigned the jobs you're going to get assigned, and it's your job to kind of figure out your way from there. So the main thing that I want to make sure that we touch on, and I'm going to touch on it early, is this was a production focused environment. Now, what I mean by that is there were many matrix that we had to kind of juggle, for lack of a better term, to make sure that we were hitting all of them. But the biggest one, right, there were two that were the biggest, but the one that we would hear most often was production. So essentially that was the mark of how much work did you get done in your day. So when we started our day, we were assigned a certain number of jobs based on how complex those jobs were keyed into the system. There's a clarifying statement there, how complex the sales agent keyed the job into the system to be. So you would get assigned
to ask you that, Jeremy. Like, I wanted to ask you a question about that. It's like, so those times were selected based on whatever was reported by the customer, right? So if it was a trouble call and they say, hey, my internet's not working, how much more information did you usually get?
Okay. So yeah, so you're absolutely right. There's a key distinction here. So they're trouble calls, which is what
Mm-hmm.
we call. So if a customer already has service and calls
Mm-hmm.
in and does not want to add anything or remove anything, they're having an issue with their service. Those are always the same amount of points. Doesn't matter what the problem is. Doesn't matter anything else. The diagnostic call for us, it was 8 points. So 8 points would equal 1 hour. We were expected to do 64 points of work per day. That equates to an 8 hour day, right? So a trouble call, so when we were going to go out and do, or service call, as some people call them, it was 8 points. So they would call and say, hey, I'm missing the golf channel, or hey, my internet's not working, hey, my phone's not working, or anything like that. Whatever they would tell to the customer service representative, they would key that in. And then, yeah, we would run out and we would essentially have an hour to do that. And I'll go through, there's a whole list of stuff we had to do in that hour. So we'll get into that in a second. But so for all other type of calls, what we special request calls, or SRs as we call them. So that would be when somebody's calling to, let's say, add a cable outlet, or they want to, if they're upgrading service, it would be an upgrade. So if they just have digital cable and they're adding internet, or full blown install, all the way up to what we call the triple play install. So that's where they've got nothing, and we're going out and we're putting the whole thing in. We're putting in, cable, internet, phone. And then, like I said, eventually we would add security to the mix, but that wasn't until later. So yeah, the point total was determined by the customer service representative or the sales representative that fielded the call. It would also determine how long the customer had to wait to get service. So, for example, if I call in today and want to get something on for tomorrow, but it's a triple play install, this is going to be, 30 points, half a day call, right? Well, more than likely, there's not a half a day's worth of availability open for tomorrow. But a savvy agent could then go in and say, okay, well, I can shave some points off of this and kind of shove it in here in between these two. Let's make it like 17 points, and we can still shove it in, and I can get somebody out to my customer right away. Unfortunately, what that does is that now only gives me, 2 to 2.5 hours to do a 5 hour job. Or a 4 hour job. So the system itself assumes that all of those numbers are accurate. Unfortunately, you're absolutely right. That's not typically how it would happen. So, yeah.
Sounds like
you're
a
absolutely
training
right.
issue, Jeremy.
Well, yes and no. It's not a training issue, and because the motivation is to get your customer on the calendar. So it's not that they didn't understand or didn't have the knowledge or the skill set to do it properly. They knew in their production focused environment, this will look better on me if I get this customer scheduled tomorrow rather than waiting till next week to when I actually have that time. And, we as technicians knew this, and we knew more than likely at least once a day we're going to get a call that's not keyed properly. It's just the way the world works. Our customers want us out there as quick as possible, and we just have to make do. And there is a saying about excrement flowing downhill. That's how we viewed it, right? Like, we were the last line. We didn't have anybody below us that it could roll down to, so we just stood in it. So that's kind of how we viewed it, and it sounds bad. It does, but we understood that's the nature of the job. We are in a customer focused environment. We may not have been happy about it, but we made the best of it. So, and touching on that, there were additional things that we would have to do on trouble calls and installations that didn't even have anything to do with what the customer actually wanted to do. So from a technician point of view, we had to do preventative maintenance if we were out there, because the other part of our job is to prevent signal leakage. So if we saw, bad connectors that could contribute to leakage or may affect our customer, we have to solve those while we're out there. So we would have to hit what we call the 3 points. So that's the point of the customer's piece of equipment. So literally right behind the TV where that digital box sits. point on the side of the customer's house where the main feed comes into the house and connects to all the wires, and then where it connects to our main plant. So that's either up on a pole or that's, in an underground enclosure somewhere. And there's a lot of times where I've spent, 30 minutes just trying to find the enclosure, because it's, where I worked was relatively rural. So it could be like in a coves of trees. It could be like sitting down beside the pond somewhere. There's really no telling. And a lot of times because these things are not very aesthetically pleasing, they'll get covered up. So,
Sure.
they'll throw the little rock over them and you've got no idea where you're supposed to be. So, but we would have to hit those 3 points and measure our signal at each one. It's also how we would kind of narrow, if it's a trouble call, it's also how we would narrow down where that problem was. In addition to actually doing the job that we're out there for, we have additional responsibilities that we have to cover as well, all within that same 1 hour time frame. So, the typical flow would be, I'm going to call, I've got all my information. I'm going to look at the job, figure out what the customer says the problem is. And then at that point, from whatever information they provide to me, and a lot of times, that customer service rep may not have put much beyond internet off or cable not working. So I have to be able to take that and call my customer, because we have to let them know we're on the way, right? And then what we were trained to do was gauge their reaction from our phone call, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of walk them through preliminary stuff on the phone, unless they're just completely done with it and they don't want to do that. So there's also a little bit of like human training that we have to do to figure out, is this person even willing to look at what I'm asking them to look at over the phone? Because, at that point, there's no benefit to the customer of doing that, other than maybe it's an instant fix. But primarily that's for the technician's benefit, because if I can do that, that means I don't have to drive to your house. Because
Right.
The next thing that we have to do, if we can't fix it over the phone, is drive time. Now, drive time is included in that hour. So if it is a 30-minute drive to my next house, that's 30 minutes that is taken away from the time that I have to spend at the house. So I have 1 hour total to deal with this customer. That means the drive to, and then solving the problem as well. Now, there were teams of dispatchers that would try to get us, jobs as close together as possible. But a lot of times they don't really have another choice based on availability and where these jobs are located. We don't, as the company itself, we don't have any control where these people live, right? So you could have a 30, 45 minute.
You were working in a rural area too, so
Yeah.
people are just automatically located further apart.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't as rural as, say, like Montana or something like that. Like,
Sure.
It's still, I live in North Carolina, so it's still, it wouldn't be like an hour to 2 hours drive to get to the next location. But yeah, it could very easily be 30 to 45 minute drive, sometimes even an hour drive. Like, your entire timeline is gone just on the drive itself. Called it windshield time. So when we were calling the dispatchers, like, hey, this is 30 minutes windshield time just to get there. Is there any wiggle room to try to help me out? And they would do their best. I know this from the technician point of view, and a technician works with many different people and is affected by many different jobs. I won't say this was the mindset of every technician, but my mindset was, everybody else is trying to do their best. So, that's all that I can do too. It didn't keep me from getting angry at the situation every once in a while, but what do
you mean, screaming out your window in frustration? Did it happen? What?
We can't do that. We could not do that because we were in a rolling billboard for the company. So you could
but
not.
You were out in the middle of nowhere. You could do a little screaming, right?
Every once in a while, yeah, I guess so. When you're not in traffic or whatever, but
exactly.
And that's the whole, like, I hadn't even planned on bringing that up, but that's the whole other thing. Like, we're a driving billboard for the company itself, so we can't be seen flipping people off in traffic. We can't be seen, like, screaming
Jeremy,
at people.
You shouldn't do that anyway.
So that's a whole other thing we had to deal with. But so after calling the customer and then driving to the customer's house and then checking the next thing will be to talk to the customer in person and get more information on what the problem they're having is. So asking those probing questions, getting the information out of them that maybe they didn't even know was relevant. So, we would have to ask them questions like, is it just this channel, or have you noticed these type of problems on this? Is your internet causing, are you seeing slowdown on your internet as well as your cable, even though maybe you don't use that as much and you didn't put those two things together in your brain.
Right.
So asking a lot of those probing questions, having that conversation while you're trying to speed it along without explicitly telling them, hey, we need to speed this up.
I have 15 minutes to solve your problem. Go.
Yeah, exactly. So once we did that, that's when we would take the signals at our 3 different points. So we would hit, behind the affected device, side of the house, up the pole, do the math, and figure out if all of that signal is flowing like it should. If it is, figure out what else is causing the problem. If it's not, try to figure out why that signal is not flowing properly. Figure out what it is, track it back to the problem area, all that kind of fun stuff. Make a diagnosis on what the problem is, fix that problem, run all of our signals again, rinse and repeat until all of the signals are working, or whatever the problem itself is alleviated. Talk to the customer, let them know what we did, sign off the job, put in our system everything that we've done. So just in case we have to come back out at some time in the future, we have to document all of the work that we did, let our system and our company know this is what I did at this house. This is what was replaced. This is what the problem was. Sign it off, and then drive just far enough away from that customer that I'm not calling one customer from another customer's driveway. Sure. They didn't want us doing that either. So, drive to the next gas station or around the corner or wherever it was that you could pull over, call the next person, do it all over again. And do that roughly about 8 times a day, give or take.
Yeah.
So, and I know a lot of people might be thinking, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so are you saying that these service SMEs that we call into a training and development project have other things to do? Is that what you're trying to say?
So on a typical day, yes. What I would say and what I would hope and what I would put out there to all stakeholders and SMEs, or I guess I should say stakeholders, because SMEs don't have, a lot of times SMEs don't have control of what they're going to be expected to do day to day anyway. So I would put this out to the stakeholders. If you're going to bring in SMEs to work on another project, if you're going to tap them to help your training department, if you're going to do things like that, the other thing you need to do is reach out to whoever manages those metrics and what those guys are expected to put forward annually, and make sure that there is some compensation, make sure that there's some kind of relaxed KPI for production so that they can actually put their entire focus on what you're doing. Because if you just pull a SME out of the field and he or she is being graded on production, they're not going to be there 100%. They're still going to have, their email open. They're still going to be monitoring maybe a trouble customer that they've had a signal trace running on for the past week to try to figure out why their internet's dropping out. They're not going to be 100% there, and your training is going to suffer for that. Even if it even gets across the finish line, they may have missed something that needed to be reviewed. But more than likely, what's going to happen is near the end of the process, when they key back in, they're going to identify 4 or 5 problem areas that you never even thought about, and now you've got to go back and do everything over. So, and that's all because in that production-faced environment, a lot of times that's all that matters. Like this, it impacts not only my annual review, so the amount of money that I'm getting paid. Right. If your production goes low, they like to say that it's that nobody's going to know what your numbers are. That it's not going to affect anything else. All of that's a lie. People will find out, and it's going to affect how often they're willing to help you. Because if you're known as the guy that doesn't get done, if you're known as the slow one, and you call somebody else to help you, the first thing they're going to think is, dude, I'm not going to help you. I don't have time to help you. It's going to take you forever to do this. And they're going to make up an excuse as to why they can't come and help you. And then you're stuck again. So not only do your production numbers affect how often you get paid, it affects how effective you are. It affects how willing people are to come and help you, or how willing they are just to answer the phone when you call them, like is what it comes down to. Because in the field, you're by yourself. So you have to know your resources. You got to know the people you can call. You got to know the websites you can go to and all that kind of stuff, because it's extremely difficult to remember everything that you're taught for every service that and every problem that could possibly pop up in the field. I would say that it's not possible.
But now, hold on, Jeremy. I thought that's what training was for, was to teach them everything they need to know. And it's right there. They can recall it in 2 seconds. What do you mean?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was going towards. So one of the things, and we'll talk about this when we get to the how we develop training for these people. For me, for any kind of training, it's 2 parts. It's 1, I'm going to train you what you need to know. And 2, I'm going to train you how to go back and find this information when you forget. Not if you forget, when you forget. I know that you are going to forget some of this stuff. I understand that. I get it. I know you're going to do it. But I'm going to give you tools that when this smacks you on the side of the face one day and you go, oh, crap. I know you talked about this. I know they said something about this. I don't remember what it is. Well, you can go to your favorites that I made you save in your Chrome or Internet Explorer or whatever you use to when you're out in the field, and it's going to be sitting there waiting on you, because I'm going to make you do that in my training class. I'm going to make you save that stuff. So, yeah, fantastic transit. Yeah, that's yeah. We'll get into more of that in a little bit, but
absolutely.
Yeah, so that's kind of. And I keep saying this production-focused environment. Obviously, there's more KPIs that they have to deal with. For us, there were the other big one. There were 2 main ones. They were called production and repeats. So a repeat would be if I came out to a customer, fixed their problem, and then that customer had to call back in within a certain amount of time. Right. For us, it was 30 days. So if we had to go back out to the same house for anything in 30 days, that's a knock on me. So even if I go out one day for, let's say, the internet being out, and then the next day they had somebody come install a fence and it cut the cable, doesn't matter. Still a repeat on me. So, and that's, and the explanation was that, okay, we give you 8%. So we say that you can have 8% repeats. That's how often the company has determined situations like I just described happens. So you essentially have to be perfect. And you have to hit everything, do everything perfect. And then if you do that, you'll still have 8% repeats come up. So that's why we give you 8% to be to meet your metric. Anything worse than 8%, you're a partially meets or a do not meet. But that's why we give you 8%.
So often, I mean, just like we talked about in our last episode about setting the learning objectives and how they're tied to business outcomes, oftentimes those business outcomes have some sort of performance improvement that is a percentage, and those have to come from somewhere. So they are setting metrics in order to do that. So we are usually being asked to improve performance in some way with some group because they are being measured on some numbered, measurable outcome somewhere. So I totally get that.
And and remember what I said earlier about stuff rolling downhill, right? Like all of that.
Exactly.
Those numbers come from somewhere. And I think a lot of times that's what maybe we don't understand quite as much. And maybe that's where some of the communication breakdown is our job as instructional designers is to really focus on those KPIs, right? And a lot of times I don't think I think we can dig a little deeper to figure out why these numbers are what they are.
Yes. Why
they want to improve them. And even if we can, obviously, if the stakeholders don't know this information, don't want to share this information, that's one thing. But how those numbers got to be what they are, because typically those
Sure.
numbers will always get harder to hit and never easier to hit. So in my 7 years as a technician, we progressively every year had to do more and have less repeats. So we had to do more in a smaller amount of time every year that I was there. So, and there was no talk of diminishing returns. Like, you just had to
Sure.
do this. These are the numbers that were set down. These are now what we got to hit. Go out and figure out how to do it. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, like, the way that we would hit that is we'd cheat. And I don't think that's the taboo subject, or at least it was when I was working. My first job as in learning was as kind of a go-between between these field technicians and the learning team. And that was the dirty little secret, right? To hit the numbers that we were asked to hit to get increases in pay. Because we didn't want the standard 3% raise, right? Nobody does. It doesn't even match inflation. So we wanted more than that. So our thought is, okay, well, how can I hit these better numbers? And a lot of times it's, okay, I don't think I can do that doing everything they're going to ask me. So what can I cut back on? What can I pull back on to put that time somewhere else? We've only got, 24 hours in the day, right?
Right.
And overtime is monitored as well. So we only got 8 hours to get all this stuff done without having to justify our overtime. So what do I not do so that I can do this other stuff and hit the numbers that are being focused on? And I found out real quick that
and not go over your repeat number, right?
Right. Yeah. So the question is, how can I do all of this, still hit my repeat number? And close to the end of my tenure as a technician, they started tracking customer satisfaction number as well. So they would call the customer after we left, and that was our big third. Buddy, that was terrible. But that's a whole nother conversation. So a lot of times we don't, as instructional designers and as people in the learning field that are one step removed from the people we're training, right? No matter who we're training, we're one step removed from them. We're speaking to them through stakeholders. We're speaking to them a lot of times through their supervisors, and through that lens of, I'm not going to tell you the truth, because if I tell you the truth, it's giving away the dirty secret that, these numbers are honestly not realistic if they're asking us to do all of this. And that, the frontline technicians know it, the supervisors know it, the stakeholders know it. I don't know if anybody above that, as you go into the C-suite and all that kind of stuff, but
right. I know too that it's frustrating for us as instructional developers whenever we go to a working meeting for a project and we're doing discovery or we're doing analysis or something, and we don't have frontline people in the room, because that's what happens is they'll be like, we can't take them out of the front line to come do this. So we're just going to send their supervisor or a manager or somebody. They can give you all the information. They work their way up. They can do it, but they haven't done it in a really long time. So then what happens is they bring the frontline people in for that final review, like you were talking about. They haven't been involved in it, but now we're going to ask them what they think. And that's when you find out, oh, shoot, this person didn't have all the steps, didn't have all the information. And now we have to go change the content. And that's why we often will ask people when they come to analysis and that sort of thing. Whenever I talk to people, I want an experienced person. I want a new person. And I want, I want both perspectives, because the person who's been there for 20 years has a very different perspective than the person who's been there for 2 days. The 20-year person is like, you need to know everything right now about everything. And the person who's been there for like 2 days is like, I really just want to know what I need to do next week. That is, so there's the disconnect. So having them both in the room, it helps, when you're talking to them, so you can get both of those perspectives, because it often works as a reminder for your really experienced SME. And I'm not saying that that's not an important person. It is, but you have to remember that you were new once also. And that's difficult sometimes.
Yeah. And I think you touched on a couple of things there that I want to expand on. And I'll use my own example as the experience. So when I started as a new technician in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
So way back in 2007, we were just coming out of like the flip phone era, right? GPSs were still yeah. GPSs were still separate units that we weren't provided. So when I started,
oh, are you serious?
Yeah. So when I started, luckily I had grown up in the area I was asked to work in.
Use maps like a pirate?
Map books. Yeah, absolutely. So it was a spiral bound set of maps. So you would, and it had an index of street names in the back of it. So you look at the street name that your house is on, you would go to your index. It would say, okay, this is on page 300 in quadrant like D5. And where's my, so I'm going to page 300 and here's my quadrant D5. And okay, so there's that. So now where am I? So now I got to figure, okay, how do I get there? So I'm looking around trying to find streets I know. I'm like, okay, I know how to get there now. So that's how I started. I didn't use the map book long. I went and purchased my own GPS unit to keep in because I was like, I'm not doing this again. I'm not doing that between every call. I'm not going to spend 15 to 20 minutes trying to figure out just how to get there before I can even put the van in drive. That's not how it is anymore. Obviously, a couple of years after I started, they integrated GPSs into all of the vans. The way they sold it was, we're going to give you this so you don't have to use your map books anymore. Obviously, anybody that had been on the job for more than a couple months didn't use the map book anyway. It stayed under your seat in case the GPS couldn't find it. But what they wanted to do was to be able to track where your van was at all times.
Sure.
Because it goes back to production, right? So they want to ensure that you're not, parking around the corner. Because again, our first try is to try to clear that call without having to go to it. So there were technicians, and I'm not going to lie, I was one of these technicians. If I was having a rough day or a long day, right, I would call the customer, clear that thing off, and then I would sit on it for 15, 20 minutes. And if anybody were to ask me about it, I'd just say, well, I had a long conversation with the customer, we got it cleared, and then I cancel that call because I can't complete that call. I cannot get the production for that call, because if I were to complete that call and then they pull my GPS record and see I never went to that house, that's a write-up. Like, you can't do that. It's falsifying paperwork. And I understand that.
Sure.
So, but the reason they integrated GPS in there and the side benefit was, okay, now we can have a GPS so we don't have to use the map books anymore. Right. But the primary reason to do that was to increase productivity. That's the KPI that was designed to increase, was our productivity. So, and not from saving us to have to find it, but our supervisors could now literally track us every second of the day. So if they suspected me of, we called it sandbagging. If they suspected me of sandbagging, they could literally pull me up, track my van all day long. And we had supervisors that would do that, and they would call you and say, hey, where you at right now? And it was eventually known, like, if you get that question, they already know where you're at.
Yeah.
Don't lie to them. They know already exactly where you are. So just, fess up to it, be honest, take your lump, move on. So, and that was the big thing, is the change from when these supervisors started to what it is right now. Because yes, you could have a supervisor that was a technician for 15 years. That could have been 15 years ago. And in just my 7 years as a technician, the process and what was expected of us changed so much. Again, like I said, I left the field in 2014. So it's been like 9 years since I've been in the field. I can't even speak to what they have to do nowadays. I don't even think they have laptops anymore. I'm pretty sure they're expected to do everything from a smartphone. Right. Which is crazy to me, because I use my laptop for everything.
Right.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right. You can't, not only can you not rely on somebody that's been out of the field more than 3 or 4 months, in addition to that, you can't even rely on what those current field technicians say when their direct report or direct report is in the room. Like if their immediate supervisor or manager or director is in the same room, they are going to lie to your face, because this is my job we're talking about. Like, I'm not going to tell you I'm cutting corners and how I'm getting these numbers if it's not by policy when that guy's sitting in the room. I may not even tell you when he's out of the room, but I'm definitely not going to say it when he's sitting there. So you may not even be getting the real version of what's going on until you get, a lot of focus groups type things will do this. And if you have time, those things work great when it's like an anonymous focus group that you can get your responses from. That's really the only way you're going to get. That's how you're going to get as close to honest responses as possible. Because again, we use people's money.
One thing, go ahead.
No,
one thing I used to do is part of training people to facilitate those types of meetings is, one of the first rules of facilitation is, set the rules for the room, right? It's like, hey, we're all going to be professionals. We're not going to throw books at one another. We are not going to call each other names. And I don't care what your job title is or what your education credentials are. In this room for this purpose, everybody is on the same page and on the same level. Now, that doesn't always work, but it helps to say that, look, this is not we're here to find out how you do your job for real. Because, some of those shortcuts and things are not always bad. Some of them, maybe it's a better way to do the process, and having those discussions sometimes can help and be like, you know what, maybe that's a better idea. They can be a true path to discovery, if you will. But you're right. If you put those people in the room with their supervisors, or you don't know the politics behind some of the things going on, sometimes you won't get what you need. You're right.
No, you're absolutely right. So that was kind of that was my kind of day to day. And again, I've talked a lot about frontline, production focused environments. I don't want to spend too much more time on that. So Tara, I'm going to kick it over to you. You have a different perspective on this. I think is just as valid as our frontline, because as training professionals, we don't train just one type of people. We train everybody in all type of jobs. So I want to lend just as much time to talk about other audiences and stuff like that as we do about frontline people.
And that sounds hellish, climbing up and doing all that. No, I've read the blog. I read it. If you guys haven't read it, go back and read the blog about Jeremy, one of Jeremy's tales of experience. Of course, I may have him tell it, or no, I'm going to have you tell a different story here a little bit. I'd rather hear a different story.
But it was definitely not for me. I will say, and I make this clarifying statement all the time, because depending on the day, I could either be the best tech that worked there or the worst. I didn't
Absolutely.
It wasn't that I didn't know. It was a motivation issue, right? This was not a job that I saw myself doing as a career, as a lifetime job, and I would make no bones about that. And people took that how they took it, but I didn't want to be in the field. That's not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I was doing it because that's the job I could get at the time. And I learned a ton. I learned how to work with my hands. I learned my problem solving ability is second to none. And all these things have helped me, as my career has grown. But I'm not going to say I was the best technician, because I wasn't. And if you talk to the people I worked with, they're not going to say that either, because we knew that there were a select few that would come in every day and they would do 100% every day. I was not one of those people. And I bless those people that were able to do that, because they are of a different mindset and of a different level of energy than I have ever had in my life, because it is physically demanding, mentally demanding, and emotionally exhausting to have to do that day in and day out at that level.
Yeah.
So I will say to any SMEs that are listening or anything like that, if you're one of those people, more power to you, man. We love you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't do it. So I'm more than happy when other people can, believe me. My experience is a little bit different. it's been mostly from the office perspective. That doesn't mean that there aren't still metrics to meet and job duties that have to be done. And there are people who are located, who are not necessarily out in the field doing things, but they are still in their offices performing tasks. The people who were dispatching people like Jeremy, the people who take those calls, the people who set those schedules, all of those people are still required to meet some sort of performance metric. Mm-hmm. I've worked in a lot of places where my performance metrics were not necessarily putting a number on something like increase sales of this or do, something this way. They were rarely ever based on that kind of a thing. Mine have been more about soft skills, about, producing processes and that sort of thing. When I started out building training, it was simply from that perspective of, I mentioned in the first episode about how I started working with victims and witnesses with the district attorney. Never really produced any learning materials when I was there. You don't really write that kind of, you can't write down a tour of a courtroom. I mean, you could, but it's not as effective as taking them there. So I didn't do a lot of that at that time. But whenever I went to the federal
watch like Law and Order, right? Like that's pretty true to life. Is that no?
Hey. Okay. It's true to life, except that it's way more intimidating to be sitting in the witness stand than watching somebody else in the witness stand. So it is a very intimidating place to be. So especially when one of the people is coming for you. So yeah, it's a little more intense in real life. But Law and Order is not far off. It's well done. I like Law and Order. So don't get me on my Law and Order track here or you'll hear all kinds of things. So basically I really started working in like developing materials and training, that sort of thing, because we were adding a new software program for the state that it was basically a cradle to grave grant management system. And a person who is a dear friend of mine now, she worked with the IT group and I worked with the District Attorney's Council, and we were one of the pilot programs for that. So it just sort of ended up that since we were piloting and doing all of the, if you do IT software rollout, there's sprints and agile and all of that. So we were constantly testing. I was one of the people testing. I was one of the potential users that was going to be rolling this out. So I ended up having to teach all of my sub-grantees, which was well over 100 different organizations, how to use this once it came out. So that is where I was coming from, is like, oh my gosh, we have this new thing. If you want your money, I have to teach all 200 of you how to use this. So what's the best way to do that? And those people didn't even work for us. It's not like I could tell them, they were like people we sub-granted money to. These were independent folks that were getting money from us. So yes, you have to do this, adult learning principle, make it relevant. You have to do this in order to get your money to pay your people. So yes, they had to do it. So it's a little bit of a different approach and knowing that, but here's the thing, as that SME, as the user SME that was going to be using this piece, and how was I going to use it and what were my users going to need? That means I had to have dedicated time out of my day every day for 6 to 9 months to be able to provide that information, test that information, because we were doing software, it's agile for a reason. You're constantly turning stuff over. So, there was something to test every couple of days, and they'd have, a group of people working on it, but I had to go test every piece of it, all of the functionality. So I had to have that time, but I still had to make all my site visits. I had to visit half of my sub-grantees every year. And I had to I had to go see half of them every year. And that's travel. That's not just, and it was travel within the state, but it was still out of the office, not able to do the other things. So I had to work that in. And so I can see that from, even the office-based person, even though I was, yes, having to travel, but even in the office, there were still grant applications to write, because you don't just get money from the government. I know that there is some sort of fallacy out there that they just pass it out, but that is not true. There's a lot of paperwork involved, and you have to write those grant applications. You have to then take sub-grant applications, because once you get the money, people have to apply for it, and then you have to award it. So you have to read, if you're going to grant to 100 people, you've got to read 200 grant applications. Okay. So I'm talking about, there's a lot of stuff involved in it. So, and then the money.
That's like a ton of mental weight. Like when I think about what I had to do, it was very physical, but a lot of times, like my brain would kind of recede back, right? Because it is the troubleshooting aspect is one thing, but it's repetitive motion a lot of times. Your problems are usually going to come down to a certain amount of things, but what you're talking about is like you have to stay like in that analysis part of your mind for so long. Like that's exhausting.
It is. It's mentally exhausting. But the thing is, and we knew that it was important that we get this out, that we get this program going. So my boss was very good about making sure that I had the time. So, but it's not like I could take, half a day every day, 4 hours out of every 8-hour day right. to test this stuff. I had to like make my other work fit into it and still make it work. And when you're not having to move around like you were from place to place, it's a little easier, but you still, if you have to go attend one of these meetings, if you're called in for a development meeting, that means you have to stop what you're doing and you have to go and you have to be engaged and listening, because what they're doing is eventually going to impact my job. So if I want my job to be easier, I need to be engaged in the development process. Because if the intent is to do that, which a lot of times that is the intent, is trying to increase performance, which also on the other side is supposed to make you better at your job. So hopefully, but I know you could argue both sides of it, but still
it's supposed to make you faster.
We're training you to do something different or something new. You should be engaged in it because you are going to have to use it. Later on, I did a PeopleSoft rollout for upgrading our state's like 10-year-old software that basically they came back and said, you guys need to replace this because we're not going to support it anymore. So it was like,
this program is sunsetting, so figure something out.
It was like $10 to $12 million or something. And we had to basically teach every state employee who touches it, which it runs the entire financial system for the state. So hundreds of people had to be taught about what was going to change. And again, having to go out and talk to siloed agencies or have meetings with their people to say, okay, this is the new thing it's going to do. How does that impact your processes? What do we need to change or teach or whatever? And it was nightmarish because I wasn't necessarily the SME on that side of it, but I could understand their frustration because they were still trying to run the state financial systems while trying to learn a new financial system about the same stuff they were already doing. And it can get very confusing. And that was a software thing. So there was the agile sprints and the testing and that sort of, so it was, it was very intensive, and wow, was it a huge project, but it's one of those things where,
in that case, checks still have to go out.
Exactly. Exactly.
Your state still has to pay its debts. Like it's still this, and that goes into a whole other kind of like humanitarian side.
Yes,
if
absolutely.
That starts to, because a lot of people, like the benefits that people rely on are state funded. So, if that transition wasn't done correctly, it's entirely possible that somebody's going hungry because
Exactly.
the software didn't operate like it should, or this person didn't
Hmm.
know how to operate the software like they should. So that's like that's a whole other level of pressure that, like, I
Right.
didn't even like being a cashier when I was a teenager because I don't like messing with people's money. Like, that's a whole other level.
Exactly. Well, and that's why. So while the SMEs come from different places, the whole point is for us as IDs to recognize where they are coming from. We have mentioned this before. Cannot express it enough. If you are a SME and you get invited to a meeting for learning development or training development, or you just get voluntold that you're supposed to show up for that, it's okay. We more often than not understand that SMEs are coming in and they have been told nothing. They don't
Mhm.
even know what course is being redone, much less anything else. So, I mean,
Yeah, and that's a good point.
my
I think,
plea is tell your SMEs what they're doing and give them the space to do it. I mean, the success of a training program is so dependent on the information that you have and what you're doing with it. And it's really this much time whenever you look at it in the grand scheme of time. Let them do it and let them
yeah,
do it well so that you don't have to go back and do it again. That's the big
yeah,
thing.
and it'll help you build your rapport with that audience because,
Absolutely.
and I think that's also a big thing that I don't think is talked about enough in the learning space is us as learning professionals building rapport with the stakeholders. I feel like we talk about building rapport with them because
Hmm.
they're the ones that we have to satisfy with the training project, but we also
Right.
have to build rapport with those SMEs so
Yep.
that they feel comfortable enough telling us as close to the real world version as possible. Because
Exactly.
if we don't have that rapport with them, then our training may end up being ineffective because they weren't comfortable sharing that type of information with us.
Yeah.
So
Or it just scratches the surface of what
yeah,
really needs to be taught. So,
right,
yeah, we
yeah,
need,
like
yeah,
mile wide and an inch deep, as they say.
exactly.
So okay, so that's our kind of two different experiences with being SMEs on the other side of this learning journey. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to turn this over to Tara, and she is going to try to get some interesting stories out of me. Like, it's, again, 8 houses a day, 5 days a week for 7 years. I could still drive around my old workspace and go, I've been in that house, I've been in that house, I've been in that building, I've been. I recently went and got my hair cut the other day. At my hairstylist had changed locations, and I go to the new location. I'm like, oh, I installed cable service in this building 6 years ago or whatever it was. And I installed it in the pharmacy next door. I remember them. I could probably go over there and talk to them about it if they remember me. So I'm going to turn it over. Let's see what comes out, and we'll see which stories come out. So hit me, Tara.
Okay.
What you got?
So you won't mess with people's money, but you'll rifle around in their house. Is that what you're telling me?
Only if there is digital cable equipment there. But yes.
So there was something you mentioned earlier that got me curious, was that you said you spent 6 weeks in a training and
Mhm.
then they would put you in the field, which I love that practice. But I just am totally curious. Did you need all 6 weeks?
So I did not. So I needed the first 6 weeks. Was the first week was the physical stuff. Okay, we're going to fit you for boots. We're going to make sure you can carry this 100-pound ladder around on one shoulder, and we're going to make sure that you can do that all day long, 8 hours a day for 5 days a week. So the first week they almost treated like a boot camp to get the people that could not do that out, because there are people that physically can't do that. Nothing against them. It's just we're not all built the same. So that was the first week, but weeks 2 through 6 was, I guess I should say, so it was 6 weeks total. That's with internet and phone that we had to come back to. So weeks 2 through 4 were digital cable training. So that we did 4 weeks up front and then went out into the field for a little bit, came back for a week to do internet, went out
Okay.
in the field for
That
a little
makes
bit, came back for a week to do telephone because those were our three big services when I got onboarded. So I did need those first 4 weeks. I did not know coaxial service. I didn't know the wavelengths, the technology behind it, what to look for, what the numbers should be, what math I should be doing. I did need that original 4 weeks.
Yeah.
When I went into training, I had a bachelor's degree in computer information systems. So the week on internet service problems, I slept through. I didn't need that. I already had the cable numbers I already knew, but from a throughput and bandwidth and all that kind of stuff, I had all that down. So that was really, really easy for me. I actually ended up helping our facilitator teach some of the there's no nice way to say this. Some of the older gentlemen that were there that are coming in now to learn how to do internet service that, they just never had that life experience. So I was actually helping some of them out as they were in the class. And I knew zero about how to work on telephone systems. That was always my Achilles heel was phone problems. I just never worked with it before. So I absolutely needed that. But yeah, so there was that middle training I kind of slept through.
Well, now as I hear you say that, that's how you probably ended up getting tagged to help with training later, is because you were helping. That is how I also would identify people who would be good SMEs in different things. Like if I developed training in one class and they were able to speak to it well, or something like that, I would be like, I want you working on this next project.
I was, my last couple of years as a technician, I was put on a special project team. I'm not going to say what that team was actually named because it'll give away who I work for. But essentially, we did a niche product that was for specific customers, had a very heavy internet component, but it was a beta. So we were working hand in hand with the training team and figuring out when this does launch, how do we teach technicians and what's the communication around that? So, yeah, you're absolutely right. I was picked for that because of my education and my background. So, yeah.
And your willingness to do it, because not everybody is willing to do that. So there's a willingness there too. So, SMEs who want to transition to ID, it's always, well,
yeah,
if you get
and
a chance to practice your training chops, do it.
And the key was they gave me time, right? They made
absolutely
concessions to what I was expected to do, how many jobs I was expected to run so that I could do that. Had they not, when they first approached me, that was my question. It's like, okay, well, what about my production numbers? What about all of this?
Right.
That was my knee-jerk reaction of, I don't know if I can do this. I would love to, but unless you make time for me, I'm not going to be able to do that. So, and we talked about that earlier. They made time for me to do that.
So I want to hear you tell a story. So let's talk. I want to know what is your funniest encounter as a installer or troubleshooter? What is your funniest one? And clean enough to tell.
Yeah. No,
I mean, it's a podcast, so we're pretty free, but
no, I'll keep it pretty clean. The one that I get the most, or the ones that I've gotten the most laugh out of, and this is from both from my fellow technicians when it happened to me, and from people that I tell now. This is when I want to be funny. This is the one I want to tell. So and it is funny, trust me, but it does start with what I call a non-pay disconnect. So that's when somebody did not pay their bill. We had a relatively light day. So when we had a light day, they would have us go out and do non-pay disconnect. So, you don't pay your bill. We have to come out manually and turn it off at most of the areas in my line of work were up on a pole because it was very rural. So there would be poles in everywhere. We would have to climb that pole. But what we're supposed to do first is knock on the door and see if you want to pay me, the technician. Do you want to pay me the money first? Because if so, I won't cut you off because they gave us a little lockbox and we had a place to store the money and all that. We'd have to turn in. Hardly anybody ever did that, obviously. Most of the time, they don't even answer the door.
As a person who doesn't like to mess with people's money, how did you feel about that, Jeremy?
I'm going to be honest with you. Most of the time, I didn't knock on the door.
Well, I was going to say, I'm sorry, but I would not knock on the door I'm like, these people are probably going to be mad.
Yeah.
That seems dangerous.
So,
it seems like a dangerous thing to do.
So I drive out, and this is, I drive out to like this farmstead in the middle of nowhere.
Sure.
So I'm driving past like pastures, horses, cows, sheep, and all that kind of stuff to get to the main house. And as I pull up, there are people out there. Like, so I can't, the reason I had to talk to them is because I couldn't avoid them.
Yeah.
Like, they were already outside. And the first thing they do is they want to walk up to the guy that's pulling up their driveway and like, hey, man, what are you doing here? So I've got to tell them. So it's, it's a family outside, and, the dad is the one that walks up to me. So he separates himself from the family because my assumption is he knew I was there. Like, we won't hard disconnect you until you're like 4 months past due. So when I pull up,
a mobile.
Yeah, I was in an ISP painted van, right? Like, had our logo all over it. So they knew. Yeah. The dad more than likely knew why I was there. So he walks up to me and we're talking, and I tell him, and I pull up his balance and I say, this is what you owe. This is what I'll have to do to pull it up. And he laughs, and that's not what I'm expecting. Right? I'm expecting him to yell at me, but he laughs. He goes, all right, man, it's on the pole in the backyard. And I can see over the house. I can see the pole. He goes, I'll open and close the gate for you. And that's exactly what he said. And it didn't kick in my head. I'm just like, oh, wow, man, this guy's being real nice. So, I lace up, get all my PPE on, make sure I got the tools that I need to get. I've got this 100-pound ladder on my shoulder, walking through this guy's, past his house and into his pasture where the pole is, because the pole comes into the back of the house. So I'm tunnel vision at this point. Like, I got 10 minutes and I've already spent 8 of it talking to this guy. I got to get it done. So I'm tunnel visioned. I throw the ladder up on the pole, and I climb up the pole. I belt off so that if something happens, I'm not going to fall and die. So I'm up there disconnecting, and the pole shakes, like the whole thing. It's a freestanding pole. All it's got is our cable line on it, and that it's not taut enough to hold that pole in place. So when you look at power poles, they've usually got a strand from the power company that's set to thousands and thousands of pounds that keeps these things from swaying in the wind. This one doesn't have that. So it kind of sways a little bit. I'm like, okay, that's not bad. Like, I'm used to this. It's just the wind blowing. And I don't look around to see what is causing this pole to shake. I just assume it's the wind. I keep going. And it shakes hard again. And this time I realize, oh, this is not just the pole shake. Like, my ladder is shaking underneath me. So I turn around and I look down, and there's a cow scratching his butt on my ladder in the pasture. And I'm like, it's a big heifer cow, like huge cow, taking up, like, I couldn't even get off my ladder at this point. So I'm like looking down and look up. Like, I finish what I'm doing, and I'm hesitating to unbelt myself, right? Because now, okay, my job's done. I'm still belted to this, but I'm 30 feet in the air. So I have to unbelt and essentially just kind of hold on to the ladder to get down to the ladder where this cow is still scratching himself on my ladder. So I get down there, and the guy is standing still in his driveway just looking at me. So I holler. I'm like, hey, man, can you help me out? He goes, nah. You serious? And I get it, like, from his point of view, like, man, you just cut my cable off. I'm not helping you.
Hey, I appreciate petty, okay? I appreciate creative pettiness.
So, I've been, like, I grew up in a rural area, so I knew that this was it's a cow. The main danger I have with this cow is its bulk and its weight.
Right.
So I know that it's not going to, like, hopefully anyway, more than likely it's not going to bite me. It's not going to, like, I just need to get it off my ladder so I can get out of here. And in my mind, I'm still like, man, I don't have time for this. So I'm on the ladder and the cow's right here. So I come all the way down to the rung right above the cow. Now, like, I kick it a little bit. Like, I just put my foot on it and try to move him. And it's a full-size cow. Like, I don't even know if that cow felt me touch him with my foot. but I'm trying to be nice, right? This is, I mean, from a pure commercial standpoint, this is this man's property. So I'm also going through like,
Absolutely.
what can I do without him being able to call in and complain about me? So I can't in any way be, malicious or violent to this animal. A, it's an innocent animal. I don't want to do that anyway. But B, I could get fired if I did that. So I am at this point, I'm about, 8 to 10 feet up because, the cow stands this high and I'm, a rung above it. So I eventually have to like shimmy and turn around. And I'm wearing, again, a huge like rat belt, hard hat, vest, tools, everything. And I just jump. Like that's all I do. The cow's not moving. So I'm on the ladder. Don't tell OSHA, but I just jump.
Wait. You mean the cow wasn't moving? Oh my God. I can't. I'm sorry. I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't.
No, the cow was not moving. He was just standing there. So yeah, so I'm fully kitted out, launching myself off of this ladder to get like over him and onto the ground. And I'm sure everybody knows where this is going at this point. Like I land and cannot keep my footing and just boom, right on my butt in this, the middle of this pasture. So the guy standing in his driveway is dying at this point, laughing. Like his kids have come over to see what this crazy man is doing in his backyard. So, but I just like, boom, right on my butt in the middle of this guy's pasture. And I slide a little bit. But again, this is a cow pasture. Guess what else is in cow pastures? Right? Cows defecate in cow pastures. For people in the city that don't know, they poop. And as we have discussed, that runs downhill. So I jump, I hit, and I slide. And lucky it was just my boots, but both of my boots go right into this big old cow patty. So now my feet are covered in cow poop. My butt hurts. I'm like, did I just break my butt bone? I turn around and I guess I startled the cow of me like cussing as I hit the ground. The cow has now walked off. So yeah, it was just an animal. Like it just saw something to scratch itself on, and that's what it did, right? So, I'm filthy. My jeans are filthy. This is also why most good technicians will keep a change of clothes in their van because I still had a whole bunch of jobs to get to. I don't keep a change of boots though. So my drinking water for that day went to washing the cow poop off my boots.
Well, now I have to get a tissue, Jeremy. I had to get one last time because I was proud of you. This time because I can't stop crying.
So yeah, I mean, and I wasn't mad at the guy. Like I was there for something negative. Like I get it, dude.
Yeah.
But I packed my ladder up. I didn't say another word to him. I just walked by him, threw my ladder back up on the van, took my boots off, threw them in the passenger seat, backed out and drove off. So yeah, that's my funny story.
That is so funny. Oh my God, that's awesome. And you know what's great about a story like that is when you're whenever you're in training, and we talk all the time about the importance of storytelling. And while that doesn't necessarily, it's teachable to some, something, but really what it does is it's engaging though. It would be a great story to tell at the beginning of a lesson about, what not to expect whenever you go to a disconnect call or something like that. Or, it would be a great lead in or hook to get, the what's in it for me for the student and teach them about why it's important. That's a great story. I love that.
Yeah. And I'll leave it to everybody else. So, we've got multiple ways that you guys can communicate with us over here at Lumius. I could do an entire episode just on these tales from the field. Like I've got dozens of them. So if that becomes something that we want to do later, we can do that. That's the one we'll share for today.
So I just want to say key takeaway from this is for your SMEs, ask if you're a SME assigned to a project and they want you to do it, ask about your performance metrics and how it impacts those and whether or not they can be changed during the duration of the project. It never hurts to ask. The people you may be working with may not even realize that they should do that. So you bringing it up, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's a huge thing for you to take away is don't be afraid to ask about that. And then if you are on the other side of it, if you're an ID who's working on a project with SMEs, be cognizant of the fact that this is probably listed in the other tasks as assigned in their job description. So
Yep.
they may not be 100% engaged. So you have to get them engaged and you have to, anything you can say about, hey, if we can get this information from you in this 30 minutes, I promise you, I will leave you alone. That is, build that rapport and talk to them and things like that. But my experience, and Jeremy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, my experience as a SME and as an ID is if you get a good rapport going with your SME and you ask each other questions all the time, you start working on a project, you may be passing questions back and forth because you've built that rapport and they want you to have the right information usually. Nobody,
Right.
I very rarely, now, we'll talk about difficult conversations and things later. The people who really don't want something to be successful, they usually have a reason for it. But most people that come to these projects want them to be successful because their name's tied to it some way and that sort of thing. Oh, and the other thing I thought of, just as I'm talking about this, as an ID working on a project, if you get a group of SMEs that are working on a project with you and their company offers some sort of incentive program or something for, an extra, like kudos for helping out or something, recommend them for it. Offer that to their stakeholders and say, hey, you know what? These people have been working really, really hard and they've given me great information. Is there something you offer that could, thank them for that? And sometimes people or companies do have that in place. So those are my little takeaways, I think, for today.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tara. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I think we'll sign off with that. I appreciate it, everybody. And we'll see you again next time.
Bye.